The Shadow Over Innsmouth by H.P. Lovecraft. Narrated by Charlie C.C. Thomas. Part 3. It must have been some imp of the perverse, or some sardonic pull from the dark hidden sources, which made me change my plans as I did. I had long before resolved to limit my observations to architecture alone, and I was even then hurrying toward the square in an effort to get quick transportation out of this festering city of death and decay. But the sight of old Zadok Allen set up new currents in my mind and made me slacken my pace uncertainly. I'd been assured that the old man could do nothing but hint at wild, disjointed, and incredible legends, and I had been warned that the natives made it unsafe to be seen talking with him. Yet the thought of this aged witness to the town's decay, with memories going back to the early days of ships and factories, was a lure that no amount of reason could make me resist. After all, the strangest and maddest of myths are often merely symbols or allegories based upon truth, and old Zadok must have seen everything which went on around Innsmouth for the last 90 years. Curiosity flared up beyond sense and caution, and in my youthful egotism, I fancied I might be able to sift a nucleus of real history from the confused, extravagant outpouring I would probably extract with the aid of raw whiskey. I knew that I could not accost him then and there, for the fireman would surely notice and object. Instead, I reflected. I would prepare by getting some bootleg liquor at a place where the grocery boy had told me it was plentiful. Then I would loaf near the fire station in apparent casualness, and fall in with old Zadok after he had started on one of his frequent rambles. The youth said that he was very restless, seldom sitting around the station for more than an hour or two at a time. A quart bottle of whiskey was easily, though not cheaply, obtained in the rear of a dingy variety store just off the square in Elliott Street. The dirty-looking fellow who waited on me had a touch of the staring Innsmouth look, but was quite civil in his way, being perhaps used to the custom of such convivial strangers, truckmen, gold buyers, and the like, as were occasionally in town. Re-entering the square, I saw that luck was with me, for, shuffling out of Payne Street around the corner of the Gilman house, I glimpsed nothing less than the tall, lean, tattered form of old Zadok Allen himself. In accordance with my plan, I attracted his attention by brandishing my newly purchased bottle, and soon realized that he had begun to shuffle wistfully after me as I turned into Waite Street on my way to the most deserted region I could think of. I was steering my course by the map the grocery boy had prepared and was aiming for the wholly abandoned stretch of southern waterfront which I had previously visited. The only people in sight there had been the fishermen on the distant breakwater, and by going a few squares south I could get beyond the range of these, finding a pair of seats on some abandoned wharf and being free to question old Zadok unobserved for an indefinite time. Before I reached Main Street, I could hear a faint and wheezy, "Hey, mister!" behind me, and I presently allowed the old man to catch up and take copious pulls from the quart bottle. I began putting out feelers as we walked along to Water Street and turned southward amidst the omnipresent desolation and crazily tilted ruins, but found that the aged tongue did not loosen as quickly as I'd expected. At length, I saw a grass-grown opening toward the sea between crumbling brick walls, with the weedy length of an earthen masonry wharf projecting beyond. Piles of moss-covered stones near the water promised tolerable seats, and the scene was sheltered from all possible view by a ruined warehouse on the north. Here, I thought, was the ideal place for a long secret colloquy. So, I guided my companion down the lane and picked out spots to sit in among the mossy stones. The air of death and desertion was ghoulish, and the smell of fish almost insufferable, but I was resolved to let nothing deter me. About 4 hours remained for conversation if I were to catch the 8 o'clock coach for Arkham, so I began to dole out more liquor to the ancient tippler, meanwhile eating my own frugal lunch. In my donations, I was careful not to overshoot the mark, for I did not wish Zadok's vinous garrulousness to pass into a stupor, After an hour of his furtive taciturnity showed signs of disappearing, but much to my disappointment, he still sidetracked my questions about Innsmouth and its shadow-haunted past. He would babble of current topics, revealing a wide acquaintance with newspapers and a great tendency to philosophize in a sententious village fashion. Toward the end of the second hour, I feared my quart of whiskey would not be enough to produce results, and was wondering whether I had better leave old Zadok and go back for more. Just then, however, chance made the opening which my questions had been unable to make, and the wheezing ancient's rambling took a turn that caused me to lean forward and listen alertly. My back was toward the fishy-smelling sea, but he was facing it, and something or other had caused his wandering gaze to light on the low, distant line of Devil Reef, then showing plainly and almost fascinatingly above the waves. The sight seemed to displease him, for he began a series of weak curses which ended in a confidential whisper and a knowing leer. He bent toward me, took hold of my coat lapel, and hissed out some hints that could not be mistaken. "There's where it all began. That cursed place of all wickedness where the deep water starts. Gate of hell. Sheer drop down at the bottom and not sounding like Kintech. Old Cap Mobed done it. Him that found out more'n was good for him in the South Sea Islands. Everybody was in a bad way them days. Trade falling off, mills losing business, even the new ones. And the best of our men's folk kilt a privateerin in the War of 1812, or lost in the Alesie brig and the Ranger's Snow, both of 'em. Gilman Ventures. Obed Marsh, he had 3 ships, afloat, Brigantine Columbia, Brig Hetty and Baroque Cemetery Queen. He was the only one as kept on with the East India and Pacific trade, though Esdras Martin's Brigantine Malay Pride made a venture as late as 20 night. Never was nobody like Cap Mobed, or Limmer Satan. I can mind him telling all about foreign parts and calling all the folks stupid for going a Christian meeting and bearing their burdens meek and lowly. Says they'd order get better goods, like some of the folks in Enges. Gods would bring 'em good fish in return for their sacrifices, and I'd really answer folks' prayers. Matt Elliott, his first mate, talked a lot too, and he was again folks doing and a heathen things. Told about his island east of Otaheite, where there was a lot of stone ruins older than anybody knew anything about. Kinda like them on Panapee and the Carolinas, but with carvings of faces that looked like the big statues on Easter Island. There was a little volcanic island near there too, where there was other ruins and different carvings. Ruins all wore away, like they'd been under the sea, and with pictures of awful monsters all over 'em. Well, sir, Matt, he says the natives around there had all the fish they could catch and sported bracelets and armlets and head rings made out of queer gold and golden covered with pictures of monsters just like the ones carved over the ruins in the little island. Shorter fish-like frogs or frog-like fishes that was drawed in all kinds of positions like they was human beings. Nobody could get out of them where they got all the stuff, and all the other natives wondered how they managed to find fish in plenty even when there was next islands had lean pickings. Matt, he got to wondering too, and so did Captain Obed. Obed, he notices, besides, that lots of the handsome young folks had dropped out of sight for good from year to year, and they want many old folks around. Also, he thinks some of the folks look darn queer, even for Kanakies.
It took all bed to get the truth out of him even. I don't know how he done it, but he begun by trading for the gold-like things they wore, asked them where they come from and if they could get more, and finally wormed the story out of old Chief Wallachia, they called him. Nobody but Obed had ever believed the old yeller devil. All but Captain could read folks like they was books. Nobody ever believes me now when I tell 'em, and I don't suppose you will, young feller, though come to look at you, you have kinda got them sharp reading eyes like Obed had."
The old man's whisper grew fainter, and I found myself shuddering at the terrible and sincere portentousness of his intonation, even though I knew his tale could be nothing but drunken fantasy.
"Well, sir, Obed he learnt that there's things on this earth as most folks never heard about, and wouldn't believe if they did hear. It seems these Kanakas was sacrificing heaps of their young men and maidens to some kind of god things that lived under the sea, and getting all kinds of favours in return. They met the things on the little islet with the queer ruins, and it seems them awful pictures of frogfish monsters was supposed to be pictures of those things. Maybe they was the kind of critters as got all the mermaid stories and such started. They had all kinds of cities on the sea bottom, and this island was heaved up from there. Seems they was some of the things alive in the stone buildings when the island come up sudden to the surface like. That's how the Kanakas got wind they was down there. Made sign talk as soon as they got over being scared, and pierced up a bargain afore long. Them things like human sacrifices had had 'em ages afore and lost track of the upper world after a time. But they done to the victims it ain't for me to see, and I guess Obed wasn't none too sharp about asking. But it was all right with the heathen, 'cause they'd been having a hard time and was desperate about everything. They give a certain number of young folks to the sea things twixt every year, May Eve and Halloween, regular as could be. Also gives some of the carved knickknacks they made, but the things agreed to give in return was plenty of fish. They drove 'em in from all over the sea, and a few gold-like things now and then. Well, as I says, the natives met the things on the little volcanic islet, going there in canoes with the sacrifices, etc., and bringing back any of the gold little jewels as it was coming to him. At first, the things didn't never go onto the main island, but after a time, they come to want to. Seems they hankered arter mixing with the folks and having gents ceremonies on the big days, May Eve and Halloween. You see, they was able to live both in and out of the water. What they call amphibians, I guess. The Kanakas told 'em there's how folks from the other islands might want to wipe 'em out if they got wind of their being that. But they said they didn't care much, because they could wipe out the whole brood of humans if they was willing to bother. That is, any as didn't have certain signs such as was used onst by the lost old ones, whoever they was. But not wanting to bother, they'd lay low when anybody visited the island. When it come to mating with them toad-looking fishes, the Kanakas kind of balked, but finally they learnt something as put a new face on the matter. Seems that human folks has got a kind of relation to such water beasts, that everything alive come out of the water once and only needs a little change to go back again. Them things told the Kanakas that if they mixed bloods, there'd be children as'd look as human at first,
that later turned more and more like the things till finally they take to the water and Jenny the main lot of things down there. And this is the important part, young feller. Them as turned into fish things and went into the water wouldn't never die. Them things never died, except they was killed violent. Well, sir, seems by the time Obed knowed them islanders, they was all full of fish blood from them deep water things. When they got old and begun to show it, they was kept hid until they felt like talking to the water and quitting the place. Some was more touched than others, and some never did change quite enough to make to the water, but mostly they turned out just the way them things said. Them as was born more like the things changed early, but them as was nearly human sometimes stayed on the island till they was past 70. Though they usually go down under for trial trips afore that. Folks as had to took to the water generally come back a good deal to visit, so's a man would often be a talking to his own 5 times great-grandfather, who left the dry land a couple hundred of years or so afore. Everybody got out of the idea of dying, 'cept in canoe wars with the other islanders, or sacrifices to the sea gods down below, or from snake bite or plague or sharp galloping ailments or something afore they could take to the water, but simply looked forward to a kind of change that wasn't a bit horrible after a while. They thought what they'd got was well worth all they'd had to give up. And I guess Obed had come to think the same himself when he chewed over old Wallakaya's story a bit. Wallakaya, though, was one of the few as hadn't none of the fish blood, being of a royal line that intermarried with royal lines on other islands. Wallakaya, he showed Obed a lot of rites and incantations as had to do with the sea things, and let him see some of the fish folks in the village as had changed a lot from human shape. Somehow or other, though, he never would let him see one of the regular things from right out of the water. In the end, he give him a funny kind of thingamajig, made out of a lead or something, that he had said would bring up the fish things from any place in the water where they might nest of 'em. The idea was to drop it down with the right kind of prayers and such, Wallakaya allowed as the things was scattered all over the world, so as anybody that looked about could find a nest and bring 'em up if they was wanted. Matt, he didn't like this business at all, and wanted Obed should keep away from the island, but Captain was sharp for gain, and found he could get them gold-like things so cheap it'd pay him to make a specialty of 'em. Things went on that way for years, and Obed got enough of that gold-like stuff to make him start the refinery in Waite's old run-down Fullen Mill. He didn't just sell the pieces like they was, for folks would be all the time asking questions. All the same, his crews would get a piece and dispose of it now and then, and even though they was swore to keep quiet, and he let his women's folk wear some of the pieces as was more human-like than most. Well, come about 38, when I was 7 years old, Obed, he found the island people all wiped out between voyages. Seems the other islanders had got wind of what was going on and had took matters into their own hands. Suppose they must have had, after all, them old magic signs, as the sea things says was the only things they was afeard of. No telling what any of 'em Kanakees will chance to get a hold of when the sea bottom throws up some island with ruins older than deluge. Pious cusses,
They didn't leave nothing standing on either the mainland or the little volcanic island except what parts of the ruins was too big to knock down. Some places they was little stones strewed about like charms, with something on 'em like what you call a swastika nowadays. Probably them was the old ones' signs. Folks all wiped out. No trace and no gold-like things, and none of the nearby Kanakas would breathe a word about the matter. Wouldn't even admit they'd ever been any people on the island. That naturally hit Obed pretty hard, seeing as his normal trade was doing very poor. It hit the whole of Innsmouth too, because in seafaring days what profited the master of a ship generally profited the crew proportionate. Most of the folks around the town took to hard times, kinda sheep-like and resigned, but they was in bad shape because of the fishing was petering out and the mills wasn't doing none too well. Then's a time Obed, he began a cursing at the folks for being dull sheep and praying to a Christian heaven as didn't help 'em none. He told 'em he'd known of folks as pray to gods that give something you really need, and says if a good bunch of men 'ud stand by him, he could maybe get a hold of certain powers as 'ud bring plenty of fish and quite a bit of gold. Of course, them as served on the cemetery queen and seed the island knowed that he meant, and wasn't none too anxious to get close to see things that they'd heard tell on, but them as didn't know what 'twas all about got kind of swayed by what Obed had said, and began to ask him what he could do to set him on a way to the faith as 'ud bring him results.
Here the old man faltered, mumbled, and lapsed into a moody and apprehensive silence, glancing nervously over his shoulder and then turning back to stare fascinatedly at the distant black reef. When I spoke to him, he didn't answer, so I knew I would have to let him finish the bottle. The insane yarn I was hearing interested me profoundly, for I fancied there was contained within it a sort of crude allegory based upon the strangenesses of Innsmouth and elaborated by an imagination at once creative and full of scraps of exotic legend. Not for a moment did I believe that the tale had any real substantial foundation, but nonetheless the account held a hint of genuine terror, if only because it brought in references to strange jewels clearly akin to the malign tiara I had seen at Newsburyport. Perhaps the ornaments had, after all, come from some strange island, and possibly the wild stories were lies of the bygone Obed himself rather than of this antique topper. I handed Zadok the bottle, and he drained it to the last drop. It was curious how he could stand so much whiskey, for not even a trace of the thickness had come into his high, wheezy voice. He licked the nose of the bottle and slipped it into his pocket, then, beginning to nod and whisper softly to himself, I bent close to catch any articulate words he might utter, and thought I saw a sardonic smile behind the stained, bushy whiskers. Yes, he was really forming words, and I could grasp a fair proportion of them.
Poor Matt, he allus was agin it. Tried to line up the folks on his side and had long talks with the preachers. No use. They run the Congregational parson out of town, and the Methodist rather quit. Never did see his old Badcock, the Baptist parson, again. Wraith o' Jehovah. I was a mighty little critter, but I heard what I heard and seen what I seen. Dagon and Ashtoreth and Belial and Beelzebub, golden calf and the idols of Canaan and the Philistines. Babylonish abominations. Mene tekel abhorrison.
He stopped again, and from the look in his watery blue eyes, I feared he was close to a stupor after all. But when I gently shook his shoulder, he turned on me with astonishing alertness and snapped out some more obscure phrases.
Don't believe me, eh? Then just tell me, young feller, why Captain Obed and 20 odd other folks used to row about Devil's Reef on a dead of night and chant things so loud you could hear 'em all over town when the wind was right. Tell me that, eh? And tell me why Obed was always dropping heavy things down into the water t'other side of the reef, where the bottom sheets down like a cliff lower'n you can sound. Tell me what he done with that funny-shaped lead thingamajig as Wallachia gave him. Hey, boy, and what did they all howl on May Eve and again the next Halloween? And why'd the new church parsons, fellers as used to be sailors, wear them queer robes and cover theirselves with them gold-like things Obed brung, hey?
The watery blue eyes were almost savage and maniacal now, and the dirty white beard bristled electrically. Old Zadok probably saw me shrink back, for he began to cackle evilly.
Beginning to see, eh? Maybe you'd like to have been me in them days when I see things at night about to see from the capello top of my house. Oh, I can tell you little pictures of big ears, and I wasn't missing nothing o' what was gossip about Captain Obed and our folks about the reef. How about the night I took my pa's ship glass up from the capello and see the reef a bristling thick with shapes that dove off quick soon's the moon's rise. Obed and her folks was in a dory, but they shapes dove off the far side of the deep water and never came up. How'd you like to be a little shaver alone up in a capello a-watching shapes as wasn't human shapes? Hey? Hey?
The old man was getting hysterical, and I began to shiver with a nameless alarm. He laid a gnarled claw on my shoulder, and it seemed to me that its shaking was not altogether that of mirth.
S'pose one night you seed something heavy heaved off in Obed's dory beyond the reef, and then learnt next day a young feller was missing from home, eh? Did anybody ever see hide or hear of Hiram Gilman again? Did they? And Nick Pierce? And Louis White? And a Durham, Southwick, and Henry Garrison, eh? Shapes talking sign language with their hands. Them as had real hands. Well, sir, that was the time Obed began to get his feet again. Folks sees his 3 daughters wearing gold-like things as nobody'd seen on them afore, and smoke starting coming out of the refinery chimney. Other folks was proposing too. Fish began to swarm into the harbour to fit to kill, and heaven knows what sized cargoes we began to ship out of Newburyport, Arkham, and Boston. I was then Obed and the old branch railroad put through. Some Kingsport fishermen heard about the kitchen and come up in slopes. But they was all lost. Nobody never seen 'em again. And just then our folks organised the esoteric Order of Dagon and bought Masonic Hole often Calvary commentary for it. Matt Elliott was a mason and agent to sell it, but he dropped out of sight just then. Remember, I ain't saying Obed was set on heaven, things just like they was on that Kanaki Isle, but I don't think he aimed at first to do no mixing or raise no young'uns to take to the water and turn into fishes with eternal life. He wanted them gold things and was willing to pay heavy, so I guess the others was satisfied for a while. Come in 46, the town was done some looking and thinking for itself. Too many folks missing. Too much wild preaching at meeting a Sunday. Too much talk about that reef. So I guess I'd done a bit by telling Selectman Mowry what I see from the cupola. There was a party one night as followed Obed's crowd out to the reef, and I heard shots betwixt the dories. Next day Obed and 32 others was in a gal, with everybody wondering just what was afoot and just what charge again 'em could be got to halt. God, if anybody'd looked ahead. Couple of weeks later, when nothing had been thrown into the sea for that long.
Zadok was showing signs of fright and exhaustion, and I let him keep his silence for a while, though glancing apprehensively at my watch. The tide had turned and was coming in now, and the sound of the waves seemed to arouse him. I was glad of that tide, for at high water the fishy smell might not be so bad. Again, I strained to catch his whispers.
That awful night, I seed 'em. I was up in the cupola, hordes of 'em, swarms of 'em, all over the reef and swimming up the harbour into the Monoxide. God, what happened in the streets of Innsmouth that night. They rattled our door, but Pa wouldn't open. Then he clomb out the kitchen window with his musket to find Selectman Mallory and see what he could do. Mounds of the dead and the dying, shots and screams, shouting, an old squire, an old town squire, a new church green, gal throat open, proclamation, treason, called it the plague when folks come in and found half our people missing. Nobody left but them, as a gin in with Obed and them things, or else keep quiet. Never heard o' my po no more.
The old man was panting and perspiring profusely. His grip on my shoulder tightened.
Everything cleaned up in the morning, but they was traces. Obed, he kinder takes charge and says things is going to be changed. Other soul worship with us at meeting time, and starting ours is he's got to entertain guests. They wanted to mix like they done with the Kanakis, and for one he didn't feel bound to stop 'em. Far gone was Obed, just like a crazy man on a subject. He says they brung us fish and treasure and should have what they hankered after. Nothing was to be different on the outside. Only we was to keep shy of strangers if we knowed what was good for us. We all had to take the oath of Dagon, and later on, there was second and third oaths that came on us took. Them as 'ud help special, 'ud get special rewards, golden such. No use balking, for they was millions of 'em down there. They'd rather not start rising and wiping out humankind. But if they was gave away and forced to, they could do a lot toward just that. We didn't have them old charms to cut off, like folks in the South Sea did, and them Kanakis won't never give away their secrets. Yelled up enough sacrifices and savage knickknacks and our bridge in the town when they wanted it, and they'd let well enough alone. Wouldn't bother no strangers as might bear tales outside, that is, without they got prying. All in the band of the faithful, order a day gone, and the children should never die, that go back to the mother Hydra and father Dagon, what we all come from once. Ia, Cthulhu, Ftagan, Puganglui, Mlguan, Fauf, Cthulhu, Rutlier, Guguan, Aglfagan.
Old Zadok was fast lapsing into stark raving, and I held my breath. Poor old soul, to what pitiful depths of hallucination had his liquor, plus his hatred of the decay, alienage, and disease around him brought that fertile, imaginative brain. He began to moan now, and tears were coursing down his channeled cheeks into the depths of his beard.
God, what I seen since I was 15 years old. Many tackled a parson. The folks as was missing, and them as killed theirselves. Them as told things in Arkham or Ipswich or such places was all called crazy like you're calling me right now, but God, what I seen! They'd have killed me long ago for what I know. Only I took the first and second holes a day gone of an Obed, so was protected. Unless in a jury had improved, I told things known and a deliberate, but I wouldn't take the third oath. I'd have died rather than take that. It got worse around Civil War time, when children born since 40 begun to grow up. Some of them, that is. I was afeard. Never did no praying after that awful night, and never see one of them close to in all my life. That is, never no full-blooded one. I went to the war, and if I'd had any guts or sense, I'd never come back but settled away from here. But folks wrote me things wasn't so bad. That, I suppose, was because government draft men was in town after 63. After the war, it was just as bad again, though. People begun to fall off. Mills and shops shut down, shipping stopped, and the harbour choked up. Railroad gave up, but they never stopped swimming in and out of the river from that cursed reef of Seaton. And more attic windows got boarded up, and more noises was heard, and houses wasn't supposed to have nobody in 'em. Folks outside have their stories about us. Suppose you've heard of plenty of 'em, seeing what questions you asked. Stories about things they've seen now and then, and about what queer jewelry as still comes in from some of ours. It ain't quite all melted up, but nothing never gets definite. Nobody will believe nothing. They call them gold-like things pirate loot, and allow the Innsmouth folk as foreign blood or as distempered or something. Besides them that lives here, show off many strangers as they can, and encourage the rest not to get very curious, especially around night time. Beasts balk at the critters, horses, wussing mules, but when they got autos, that was all right. In 46, Captain Obed took a second wife that nobody in the town never see. Some says he didn't want to, but was made to by them. As he called in, had 3 children by her. 2 is disappeared young, but one gal is looked like nobody else, and was educated in Europe. Obed finally got her married off by a trick to an Arkham feller as didn't suspect nothing, but nobody outside'll have nothing to do with Innsmouth folk now. Barnabas Marsh, that runs the refinery now, is Obed's grandson by his first wife, son of Onesiphorus, his eldest son, but his mother was another of them, and wouldn't ever see it outdoors. Right now, Barnabas is about changed. Can't shut his eyes no more, and is out of shape. I say he still wears clothes, but he'll take to the water soon. Maybe he's tried it already. They do sometimes go down for little spells afore they go for good. Ain't been seed about in public for nigh on 10 year. Don't know how his poor wife can feel. She come from Ipswich, and then nigh lynched Barnabas when he courted her 50 odd years ago. Obed, he died in 78, and all the next generation is gone now. The first wife's children's dead, and the rest, God knows.
The sound of the incoming tide was now very insistent, and little by little it seemed to change the old man's mood from maudlin tearfulness to watchful fear. He would pause now and then to renew those nervous glances over his shoulder or out toward the reef, and despite the wild absurdity of his tale, I could not help beginning to share his vague apprehensiveness. Zadok now grew shriller, and seemed to be trying to whip up his courage with louder speech.
Hey, you! Why didn't you say something? How'd you like to be living in a town like this with everything a rotten and a dying and a boarded up monsters crawling and bleating and barking and hopping around, black cellars and attics everywhere you turn, eh? How'd you like to hear the howling night after night from the churches in order to dig on all and know what's doing part of the howling? How'd you like to hear what comes from that awful reef every May Eve and Hallows Mass? Hey? Think the old man's crazy, eh? Well, sir, let me tell you that ain't the worst.
Zadok was really screaming now, and the mad frenzy of his voice disturbed me more than I cared to own.
Curse ye, don't sit there a-staring at me with them eyes. I tell old Bard Marsh he's in hell, and he's gotta stay there. In hell, he says, can't get me. I ain't done nothing, nor told nobody nothing. No, oh, you young feller? Well, even if I hadn't told nobody nothing yet, I a going in now. You just sit still and listen to me, boy. This is what I ain't never told nobody. I says I didn't do no prying at her that night, but I found things out just the same. You wanna know what the real horror is, eh? Well, it's this. It ain't what them fish devils has done, but what they're a-gonna do. They're a-bringing things out of what they come from in the town. Been doing it for years and slackening up lately. Them houses north of the river betwixt Water and Main Street is full of them. Them devils and what they brung. And when they get ready, I say when they get ready. Ever hear tell of a Shoggoth? Hey, do you hear me? I tell you, I know what them things be. I seen 'em one night when...
The hideous suddenness and inhuman frightfulness of the old man's shriek almost made me faint. His eyes, looking past me toward the malodorous sea, were positively starting from his head, while his face was a mask of fear worthy of Greek tragedy. His bony claw dug monstrously into my shoulder, and he made no motion as I turned my head to look at whatever he had glimpsed. There was nothing that I could see, only the incoming tide with perhaps one set of ripples more local than the long-flung line of breakers. But now Zadok was shaking me, and I turned back to watch the melting of that fear-frozen face into a chaos of twitching eyelids and mumbling gums. Presently, his voice came back, albeit a trembling whisper.
Get out of here! Get out of here! They seen us! Get out for your life! Don't wait for nothing, they know now! Run for it! Quick! Out of this town!
Another heavy wave dashed against the loosening masonry of the bygone wharf and changed the mad ancient's whisper to another inhuman and blood-curdling scream. Before I could recover my scattered wits, he had relaxed his clutch on my shoulder and dashed wildly inland toward the street, reeling northward around the ruined warehouse wall. I glanced back at the sea, but there was nothing there. And when I reached Water Street and looked along it toward the north, there was no remaining trace of Zadok Allen. Hey y'all, thanks for listening to the end. I hope you enjoy, and I hope you'll stay tuned for the next entry in Shadow Over Innsmouth.